Hello and welcome to Fowl Plays, where we look at tales of tabletop tragedy that are sure to ruffle some feathers. I'm your host, Boss Goose, and in today's story, we have a player who joins an online game and pitches their character idea to the DM, who quickly rejects it for being too edgy and continues rejecting all of OP's ideas over the weeks leading up to Session 1, often for little to no reason. When the game finally does begin, DM proceeds to ridicule those who don't live up to his expectations, starts playing favorites among the players, and argues against any criticisms, wanting only praise for his ideas. Before we start the story though, we've been invited to join a brand new adventure, and it's time to choose the perfect character to round out that party. I've got 3 options here for you to choose from, so would you rather be an elf monk, a dwarf cleric, or a tiefling rogue? I'm told the DM is picky though, so make your choice carefully and we'll get started in 3, 2, 1, and we might actually want to skip this adventure as it turns out the DM running this game is the same one featured in today's story. That means that unfortunately all 3 of these options have been rejected and you've been assigned Wilfiz Bellyback Gnomish Baker Extraordinaire. He's basically useless when it comes to combat, but he does bake a mean muffin. There is some good news though, he also comes with a subscribe button. And if you hit it, you'll get updates whenever new videos are available on my channel and easy access to hours of existing content already on there that'll help you pass the time while you're waiting for the dough to rise. Now that we've dodged that bullet, it's time for you to take your seats and wet your beaks as we dive on into today's tale. I've been playing D&D 5e online for about 4 years now, and over that time I've amassed some awful experiences. I wanted to write about this one in particular because originally I didn't think much of it. I left this game for IRL reasons, but the more I thought back on it, the more I realized what a truly awful experience it was. Maybe it's a bit of an overreaction, but I feel the need to vent about it anyways. If you do read this though, thanks for sticking around. Anyways, here's the story. It started out with me looking for a group to play with on some D&D Discord servers. After a bit of looking, I found a post which was exactly what I was searching for. Something along the lines of RP heavy, character story focused, taking place in a fleshed out homebrew world. I shot him a message and answered some questions. He seemed pretty chill, and after the interview was done, I was accepted into the group. Then he asked me to pitch him a character. I figured it would be something along the lines of, tell me what you want to play and we can work on it together. What he actually meant was, make up the whole character concept, and I will accept the one that I like. So, I started out by saying that I was looking into maybe playing a shadow sorcerer. He asked me for more details and I wrote a short write-up of what I had in mind. It was something along the lines of a half-elf born into a middle-class family. He was treated like shit by everyone except his older sibling because of his abilities. The 2 of them ran away from their parents and made a home in a small abandoned shack in a different town. The sibling was his support, and when he grew up, around 19 to 20, the sibling suddenly disappeared one day with no trace. I imagined the character being quite innocent and not really having an understanding of how the world worked. DM. That sounds kind of edgy and cringe. This campaign's not for some man-child. What else you got? Me. Alright, I'll think of something else. This is where it became a bit of a problem. I've been told no by DMs before with good reason, but this was the first time I've got a hard no with no good reason and no room for change. Just a simple no. I pitched him over a dozen characters, I'll include some of them, over the course of 2 weeks, and honestly, I just kind of started phoning it in near the end. I remember pitching a half-orc who was a retired mercenary. He tried to be a farmer for a while, but realized that's not how he wants to go out. He wanted to die in battle and earn a warrior's death. Totally not Sarfang from WoW. I described him as relearning a lot of his old skills that had kind of atrophied. Not sure if that's the right word, from years of not being used. DM. So he used to be like higher level, but he's out of practice? Me. Yeah, sort of. DM. Paraphrasing. That sounds kinda lame, like relearning his old abilities and stuff. Also, the whole warrior's death sounds like a Goliath anyways. So if it was like a Goliath, it would totally make more sense. Me. Alright, well I was hoping to play a half-orc. Would it be necessary to switch races? DM. Yeah, it just makes more sense to me. It's more along the lines of how I see Goliaths. I pushed back against this a bit, but he wouldn't budge, so I eventually dropped this character as well. Another thing the DM would do, other than just say no, was to completely change the character. So, around the time I pitched this character, the group was starting to fill up, and I didn't want to double up on any classes. We sorely lacked a front line, so my options were a bit limited. I settled on a paladin and had the idea of a black dragonborn paladin of Bahamut. The idea for the story was that he wanted to be the champion of Bahamut, but was denied because he was a chromatic dragonborn and not a metallic one. He fought back and rebelled against his church and was given an impossible task. Totally not stolen from John Wick, which I did also make a joke about. He would have to go into the world and slay 5 chromatic dragons, one of each color. Then and only then would he be allowed to become the champion. The DM immediately made it known that he did not like this idea. DM: ugh, I don't really like this concept. Also, not a fan of John Wick. Me: well, alright, but I think I want to go with something along those lines. I like the idea of a Dragonborn Paladin. Could you tell me about Dragonborn and the Church of Bahamut so maybe I can think of something else? What followed this question could only be described as a shitstorm of lore that I know for a fact he made up on the spot just so I couldn't play this character. And if that's not the case, he's got to be the worst writer ever. I'm going to paraphrase a bunch here so I can sum it up in a paragraph. Dragonborn on the continent were all enslaved, and all followers of Bahamut were also enslaved or slaughtered on sight. By whom, you may ask? Some evil cult of Tiamat? An army of Oathbreakers? Nope. It was the followers and clerics of Arathis, a lawful neutral god, and Pelor, a neutral good god. They took them as slaves and forced them to murder other followers of Bahamut, as any worship of the Platinum Dragon was considered heretical. By the way, if you are unaware, Bahamut is also a lawful good god. This made no sense. Why are the followers of good gods taking slaves and committing genocide? I brought this up to him and he said, again, paraphrased a bit, DM: the clerics of those gods are doing it without their god's permission and knowledge. Me: that doesn't really make sense. How are the gods not aware of this? It goes against what they stand for. There is no way that 2 gods are unaware of their own clerics using their powers to do such horrible things to another church. DM: that's a good point actually. I'll change it a bit. He didn't change it. The next day, I wake up to a wall of text. Turns out, he had taken it upon himself to write the backstory for my Dragonborn Paladin. Something that fit his style of game and was acceptable in the game. I did not want to play someone else's character which I had no say in, so I decided to scrap the character altogether. I also remember making a human fighter with a pretty straightforward backstory that the DM actually agreed to. It took a bit of effort with a lot of pushback on some of the mechanical aspects of the character. I wanted him to originally be an Eldritch Knight, but the DM felt that that would be too similar to the Wizard, and that it might be a problem if the Wizard was just better than my character in every way. I didn't really care, but he was insistent. I switched the story and became a Battle Master, but it ended up being rather boring and didn't give me much to work with. I decided to stick to the concept of the character, but change to a human paladin instead. I also want to point out that at this point, we are a few short days away from the first session. To swap to paladin was a big problem for the DM, and he no longer liked the character. I was tired of the back and forth, and due to some IRL stuff and work, I was just generally exhausted. I was upset and a bit disheartened that I couldn't play any of the characters I really wanted to play. I admit that maybe not all of them were great, and some might have just been outright shitty ideas, but that's what happens when you start scraping the bottom of the barrel. The next day, the DM tells me to just give him a very basic idea of what I want to play. I just say Human Vengeance or Conquest Paladin. He calls me edgy. Sure, whatever. This was another thing I noticed. He had a distaste for anything edgy. God forbid your character has dead parents, even if they died of old age, or was even remotely dark. You would be branded as edgy and ridiculed. This point does come up later. Anyways, he writes up a story for my character. It's actually not too bad this time, and I offer some changes to the story so that I can have some say in what I'm playing. I gave him notes and changed up the story, which he accepted, and I was ready to go for the first session. The first session rolls around, and something I want to point out was that the DM was really insistent that we participate in RP, going so far as to even force it. He also had a rule that good RP moments would be rewarded with bonus XP. Not XP shared with everyone, just the person involved. I thought it was a good idea, and we set off. The session kicks off and the rest of the characters are introduced. The game was actually fun, and the party gets together and sets off on their first quest. The session goes by without much issue, but I realized something rather quickly, that the bonus experience was not a good thing. It created a competition amongst the players to hog the spotlight just so that they can get a mechanical benefit from it. In fact, the party leveled up to level 2 at the end of the session, except for the party ranger, who didn't get any bonus experience. The DM, after the session ends, immediately begins to badmouth the ranger behind his back for not living up to his expectations, and not RPing like he should have been. I thought that was rather reasonable considering we were still a bunch of strangers and didn't have much to say to each other yet. The next session, the party finishes the quest, and it was a lot more RP and downtime. At this point, the problem with the bonus experience became very apparent. The warlock of the party decided that the best way to RP was just drop their entire backstory on us in the second session. I was under the impression that we would play it close to the chest and not share our secrets just yet, but the warlock just fully divulged everything. The entire session just became about him and his character with very little room for the others. The DM didn't help either. In fact, he actively encouraged this. The warlock went around and spoke with each of the characters one by one and shared his whole story, which, by the way, was dark and edgy, and asked for the characters' help. This took up a lot of the session, and was honestly a pain in the ass. Not to mention that the same night, the DM decided to do a whole dream sequence that he made up on the spot just for the warlock. I do recall me and the ranger having a little talk about our characters because we were both from noble families. It was here that I realized that the DM didn't take any of the notes that I had wrote about my character, and instead just went with the version he wrote. The ranger made a check to see if he recognized my family and was given a bunch of info, all of which was not true to the version of the story I wrote. Also, by making this info known to the others, he had effectively made it canon. I didn't want to interrupt the session, but I was obviously very upset. Later, when the session was over, he told us that the dream sequence wasn't planned and patted himself on the back for how good it turned out to be. He was also looking for feedback from the players, though it was more along the lines of, give me praise and tell me I'm amazing. Any other feedback and even criticism will be argued against because I can't do any wrong. Also, we were talking about edgy stories because we had heard the warlock story, and I remember the DM saying, "You think that's edgy? Man, you guys should see some of the stories I write for my characters. I like to write almost a whole novel about my characters, and generally, they are super dark." Another thing was that he never referred to himself as a DM. He always said that he was a fantasy author. This is a rather small point, but I thought it was dumb. The session after that, 2 players were missing due to other obligations, and this session was more combat. We fought some creatures, and the warlock actually ended up dying. Thankfully, the NPC that was traveling with us was a 5th level cleric, with the Revivify spell and the diamonds to cast it, which I thought was a bit bullshit, and I'm sure he just made it up. I remember that before he was revived, the warlock was getting really pissy at the others for not helping him, even though no one there had the capability to help. I didn't have any lay on hands left, and the cleric was too far away, and one of the 2 missing players was the main healer, Divine Soul Sorcerer. He actually got mad at us for not putting him above the rest of the party. The session ended with us splitting up the loot and continuing on our journey. It was at this point that I left the game because of a family tragedy, and didn't feel like playing. The DM offered to keep a spot open for me when I wanted to return. I did return for one session about 2 months later, and many of the problems were the same. I wanted to make a new character and had to go through a bunch of shit for that. I played through it, and before the next session, I got COVID, so I dropped out once again. I do remember sharing a screenshot of the positive result in the group so that they knew what's up. The DM, with no regard for my illness, just said,
Aw man, another game ruined by COVID. First it was my IRL game, and now my online one too.
Being that I was sick and had a hard time breathing properly, I was a bit upset, and told them to fuck off and left. If you did somehow make it through this, thanks for reading. Do let me know if all this is maybe a bit much, or maybe I'm just the asshole. I don't know. So, I'm gonna go ahead and say that OP is in fact not the asshole here. DM was raising a lot of red flags right from the beginning with their half-hearted reasoning for turning down all of OP's character ideas, some of which I really liked, like the old mercenary idea. Maybe DM just didn't want certain classes or races in their game, but it really seemed like he just had a low opinion of any ideas that weren't his own. He also turned out to be a pretty big hypocrite with some of those criticisms he made about characters being too cringy or edgy, especially since we found out that another player, the Warlock, was using an edgy backstory, and the DM himself even bragged about how dark his own character stories tended to be. Moving on, RP-focused games can be a ton of fun, but this DM went about setting it all up the wrong way. First off, you really need to let players RP at their own pace. Things might be a little slow at first as everyone is starting to get to know each other, but letting it happen organically is going to have a much better payoff down the road. Second, I really don't like this bonus XP rule that the DM implemented in the game either. While encouraging RP can be a great thing, this rule can and did immediately start causing problems, with players trying to keep attention on them while others ended up getting pushed into the background. Not only can this cause imbalance in the party with some characters leveling faster than others, but it also creates an environment where the people who don't get these bonuses can easily be excluded and even singled out and ridiculed, like what happened with the Ranger. There's no room for bullying at a D&D table, and this kind of environment fosters that kind of behavior. Not to mention the favoritism that DM started showing towards Warlock, who seemed to jump on the whole RP bonus XP train. It's never mentioned or clarified, but between them getting what appeared to be preferential treatment and the fit they threw when they weren't being healed, I wouldn't be shocked if they and DM weren't friends prior to the game starting. I also think it's very telling that the DM preferred to be called a fantasy author. I don't believe that he actually wanted to create a collaborative story experience, but rather wanted an audience to show off his own storytelling abilities. Between the shooting down of all OP's character ideas in favor of his own, the complete rejection of any sort of criticism that may have been given, and the general thirsting for praise for his performance, I'm gonna guess that the DM was just using the game to feed their own ego. That's just my opinion, but regardless, the players deserved better. Anyways, thanks for checking out my video and sticking around till the end. Hopefully you found it entertaining. I upload new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so make sure you check out my channel for more D&D stories. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a goosebump in the comments below. Your feedback and support is greatly appreciated. But until next time, be good players.